What is going on, y'all? KMBest here. Let's take a look at the best decks to climb in Marvel Snap. Shoucasta has been showing signs of sustained success as one of the most played decks at High Infinite and also one of the most successful. Very often when a deck reaches a significantly high play rate or metagame saturation, people start being able to counter it in meaningful ways or just playing decks that it doesn't necessarily have good options against. It's a testament to just how powerful this plan is that it's able to be such a potent Plan A deck that also has an unbelievably potent Plan B against which many decks simply are not able to compete in terms of point output. That's not to say there aren't decks that have good point output and also, say, a Cosmic Ghost Rider available to them, but that those decks have weaknesses of their own that a deck like this can manage to exploit. The combination of a very powerful endgame thanks to the Shou-Lao and Activate combination of cards means that this deck is, more than any other deck, moving into the combo sector of the metagame that was left relatively bereft after the death of Star-Lord Negative. That is allowing this deck to be the tallest deck among many mid-range decks in the metagame, and when you are the tallest of the quote-unquote mid-range decks, that's a really good situation to be in. But what makes this deck truly special is that even when people are interacting with it, it's just hard enough to deal with the point output from a base Shou-Lao onto kind of anything, let alone when you're multiplying that point output. The answers to a combo deck are typically pretty low in terms of impact on the board. So if your opponent is playing Doom 2099 and they get rid of your Jocasta and an Omega Sentinel, you can still very easily win the game by putting a Shou-Lao buff onto a Maverick in the backline, a Scarlet Spider in the backline, and just outpowering them that way. This means that this deck has a lot of ability to beat the things that are supposed to beat it. And if you aren't playing those things, well, it might just run you over anyway. More than anything else, this deck is benefiting from the lack of quality combo decks in the current meta right now. Shou-Lao usually is a deck that plays at least some interaction, but there really aren't any decks that are forcing it to do so, and thus we get a deck where this is pretty clearly the number one option. That's not to say that, like, Merlin and Spider-Ham aren't technically interaction, but they're a very minimal amount of it. Like, yeah, okay, Merlin interacts with magic, and Spider-Ham can, like, 1 in 5 maybe win the game, but that's really why you're doing them. You're not doing them to have, like, interactive options against a wide variety of decks. They just help. Another factor really benefiting the general preponderance of Shou-Lao decks is that there are a lot fewer Gambit decks right now than there previously were. I still believe that Leehand is pretty clearly the best way to play a Gambit deck in the modern era of Marvel Snap, and frankly, I think it's a little bit slept on, even though I have it this high. Leehand is a deck that has a lot of the similar modality to a deck like Shou-Lao. The difference between the two decks is A, Gambit is quite good in the sort of, I guess you'd call it a pseudo mirror, even though I don't really think of it like that. It's quite good against the best deck in the game. And B, you can also overestimate how good it is against the best deck in the game. Gambit is not an instant snap. It is not an instant win. They can still beat you. It's just quite good. A lot of that matchup is about timing your Gambits. You don't want them to go off on turn 6 after they've already created a bunch of large Scarlet Spiders for you to lose to. It's contextual. A lot of what you're doing in that matchup depends on your understanding of their game plan at the time. Gambit very often going off on turn 5 is going to be a lot better, and then they can try to one-up you by activating their stuff even before they think the Gambit is going to be able to actually function. That arms race is kind of what that matchup is about. If you both wait until turn 6, the Shou-Lao deck ends up favored because they're just making a bunch of guys that cost 4 or afflicting all your stuff with -7 before you can actually blow up their things. So it's important that you blow up their things before they turn them on. Now, luckily, most of the time, you're not going to have to worry about this. It really doesn't seem to have percolated downwards on the ladder that what this matchup is about is getting the value out of your stuff before Gambit blows it up. So a lot of the time, if you just go for the heuristic of turn 5 Gambiting them, you're probably going to hit them. A lot of people are playing that Shou-Lao deck very greedily, but that is what the matchup is about. Just because we're currently on level 1 of people understanding that doesn't mean it'll always be like that. This is a deck that I think has lower power output than the Shou-Lao list. It is less of a combo deck than the Shou-Lao list, but it does play a particularly powerful card in the matchup in the form of Gambit, and I do think it is significantly underrated. There are really only a couple choices you're going to be making when you play this list, and the most important one is going to be, are you going to play Caliban and Sandman, or are you going to play a Mercury and a Cannonball? I have opted for Caliban and Sandman here because I am aiming myself at the previous two lists. I think it is much more beneficial for me to aim this deck at things like V-Hand and Shou-Lao, against which Sandman is significantly better than a Mercury would be, or even a Mercury Cannonball. That is generally the ethos behind why I've put this list together in the way that it's put together. I think it is just a very solid, easy deck to play that I genuinely think a lot more people would benefit from playing than otherwise. I think a lot of people trick themselves into wanting outs to everything. They spend a lot of time playing Marvel Snap thinking, I wish I had the card that isn't in my deck that would have won this game. But that's not really the right way to go about it. And I do think that this deck covers a lot of what you would want to cover just by virtue of having a Cosmic Ghost Rider in there. What you really want is a good proactive game plan and a broad but relatively shallow array of answers. So that way you can answer a lot of stuff, but if you're really in deep, you know that you don't have anything for that and you can simply retreat. But what's more important is just having great output. And Doom 2099 is a deck that has great output and powerful 5-cost tech cards. The real winners in this deck are Sandman and Cosmic Ghost Rider. Those are the cards that are the special things that this deck gets to do. Very few other decks are like meaningfully able to leverage those 5-cost tech cards. Doom 2099, by virtue of its point output being located on turn 4 and turn 6 mostly, is very able to leverage them. And that is a very powerful dynamic to bring to bear. This deck does work. I covered this Star-Lord list yesterday, and while I do think it is a powerful list that is still a major part of this metagame, I don't think it's nearly the threat that it was previously. It's just pretty good. And largely what Star-Lord is doing is trying to access the sector of the metagame that was most devastated by the nerf to Star-Lord, which is to say combo stuff, right? What happened after the Star-Lord nerf was that basically the entire combo sector, which had been wholly concentrated into Star-Lord lists because they were so good against other combo decks and because they were so good generally, almost disappeared overnight. So everyone went back to playing mid-range decks, which is why you see Shou-Lao at the top of this tier list, because that's the best mid-range deck, and we haven't found any way to like take these old school combo decks and bring them up to the speed of the current metagame. Like, when you look at a lot of combo decks, how good are they into an activate Shou-Lao draw? Because if you're playing a combo deck, you don't have interaction. And so when you're playing a combo deck like Living Tribunal or something against the deck that's going to be able to -35 your Living Tribunal board, is that actually good? Is that actually a thing you want to be doing? And I think that's largely the biggest explanation for how the metagame is right now. That Shou-Lao list at the beginning is the best mid-range deck and also kind of the best combo deck. So the attempt at doing old Star-Lord stuff is to say, hold on now, what if we just say this is still the strongest combo thing to be doing? It is still going so far over the top that you will be able to beat those people. And that's basically the premise. If you're really worried about Activate Shou-Lao and a couple of other things, I think you could very easily put a Cosmic Ghost Rider in for this Legion. I prefer the Legion for the flexibility that he has, but I can totally understand someone playing a CGR instead. This is a list that is significantly worse than it used to be. I really cannot stress that enough. It is much, 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 much worse. You should not necessarily be going out of your way to play it. I almost view it as more of a placeholder for the space combo decks are in, because simply nothing else has risen up to the level that we would need to have a combo deck be functional in this metagame. This is what we have. It's this and maybe a Mr. Negative Brew, but I'm not particularly convinced by them in the wake of the Star-Lord nerf. All of that is to say that this guy is there because combo decks, this is a metagame that is genuinely good for combo decks. There just aren't any good combo decks. And so we're playing a fairly medium combo deck, but it's good enough. Another extremely safe, straightforward, and relatively powerful option is the ramp list. Now, this list has remained basically the same for several months now. It's a very straightforward deck. You play your 2 that is going to get abnormally large. On 3, you play a ramp card. On 4, you play a 5. On 5, you play a 6. On 6, you play a 7. That is Fin Fang Foom. That's the entire game. Now, how do you actually beat people with that? Largely, the answer is by concentrating very heavily on winning one location and making it prohibitively large early, and then allowing your late game cards, your 6 and your 7, or maybe just your 7, to carry you the entire way. This is a very predictable game plan. In much the same way that Doom 2099 has weaknesses of predictability, this deck has the same thing going on, except I think it's even more predictable than Doom 2099, which at least has you think about where things might end up. Largely, these 2 decks end up attacking a lot of the same axes of the metagame. I'm going to be a deck with a lot of power and a Cosmic Ghost Rider, and really that's just going to have to be enough. But they end up losing to the same kind of things too. I have a lot of power in a Cosmic Ghost Rider, but my opponent is playing a combo deck that doesn't really care about either of those things. Or I have a lot of power in a Cosmic Ghost Rider, but my opponent is playing Shou-Lao and is very able to attack what I'm trying to do. Oh, they really only need to win one lane, and if I'm going to play a Fin Fang Foom, all they've got to do is have more than 10 power in the back row. That kind of thing and that kind of thinking is largely the weaknesses of decks like Ramp and of Doom 2099. I wanted to show a bit of a weirdo adaptation of Supergiant that I've seen making the rounds recently. I'm not positive that it's exactly correct, but largely what I'm getting at here is that Supergiant itself is still a pretty powerful card if you're willing to actually put the work in. What I'm interested here is the double 5 strategy. This is a pretty interesting thing to be doing, but I don't want to sit here and tell you that this is the only way to play Supergiant, because frankly, either the Ronin package or the Ozymandias package with more interaction and stats guys is still going to be totally fine. You'll notice what this deck is missing is also pretty notable. You're missing an Iron Patriot and you're missing a Cosmo. So if you don't feel like playing one of these packages, I think you know exactly what to get back in the deck instead of Ozzy or the Ronin package. Pretty straightforward there. This is a deck and an archetype that is particularly compelling if you are a good fundamentals Marvel Snap player. There's a couple of interesting interactions that you have to pay attention to with Supergiant, particularly against decks that are relying on end of turns, being able to like blank Iska or blank a Doom 2099. That's a powerful thing that's going to come up. That's to say nothing of actually blanking a dedicated EOT Invisible Woman First Steps deck, but frankly, I think that deck is taking a lot of punishment from all the Cosmic Ghost Rider people and the other activate combos that I'm not particularly convinced it's a good choice in the first place, but if you are still seeing it, there are some meaningful Supergiant counters there. This is also a deck that I like being able to go maximalist with. I like having a floor that's high, right? One of the big issues with a normal Supergiant deck is you just sort of sit there and you look at everything and you're like, man, I'm really not making any points this game. It's one of the few decks that I think genuinely has a losing matchup to Arishem, where most decks with a game plan are usually going to be pretty good as long as they execute the game plan. Like for a lot of well put together decks, Arishem is just, did I do what my deck does? And then you're probably going to win. And for Supergiant, it's the opposite because Supergiant doesn't have a proactive game plan in the same sense. Supergiant is a very reactive kind of control-y deck that isn't really built to get big brothered by Arishem the way that it does. It's built to be a deck that throws wrenches in the wheels of the decks that are synergistic enough to beat Arishem. And that is what you're trying to do here. You want to throw wrenches in wheels. But what I'm interested in specifically is not just the addition of the additional points here. Obviously, I like that. I like points. I like winning games with points. The no Cosmo feels like something that's gotta be crazy, but the more I think about it, the more I'm like, what am I actually Cosmoing? What am I actually going to Cosmo in this metagame? Is Negasonic just actually that much better? And I think that's the real thing. Negasonic is kind of unbelievable in this metagame, and Cosmo is kind of medium. So while I don't think this is going to be the type of supergiant that is long-term going to catch on, I do think it's interesting as a representation of metagame trends, but I'd like you to think of this section of the tier list more as just supergiant generally than this specific list. I've seen a lot of people messing around with this Phantom X list, and while I have no particular animus towards it, it does feel like a fairly okay-ish kind of deck in a world of things that are particularly good. Like, if you asked me to sort of rank the Jocasta decks, it would be 2 or 3 below Shou-Lao, and it's one of those things where it's like, what is my compelling reason to be doing this? Why would I choose to do this one instead of choosing to do the Shou-Lao thing? And it's a lot of the answer is because it's cool and fun and Phantom X, and maybe you can figure out ways that you could put things together to be powerful. And I like what they're doing when it comes to the Jocasta lane. Like, I like being an all-in Jocasta deck, even though I can get got by Cosmic Ghost Rider, by things of that nature. It's a fairly potent combo deck that I think is more comparable to, I think I would say, the Invisible Woman First Steps deck than I would to the versions of Shou-Lao that are playing an Activate package. That said, there is one card that this deck runs that these other decks don't have the ability to run, and that's Normal Gambit, who is just genuinely a great Hail Mary to have in your back pocket if you're going to be the kind of deck that is a little bit worse at point output than several other decks in the space. What is the reason to play you? You've got a Hail Mary. You know how in basketball sometimes the worst team is incentivized to increase the variance and shoot a bunch of three-pointers? That's Gambit. You're a little bit worse than a lot of the other things in your space, but you are jacking 50-foot threes, and that is what Gambit is able to do for you. There's real power in this list, by the way. Like, this is not a deck that is, like, overwhelmingly worse than those things. It's just worse by a little bit, and then the argument is basically, I have this Hail Mary that makes up for maybe I'm a little bit worse at point output than Invisible Woman First Steps is. When you compare and contrast the Invisible Woman First Steps deck and the Phantom X deck that we just talked about, the big thing you'll notice is the Phantom X deck, not just Gambit, but also Shadow King, has more meaningful interaction for what the current metagame is. The Invisible Woman First Steps deck is 12 cards of Engine, to use Yu-Gi-Oh! Parlance here. This is a deck that is not playing any of the interaction. It's just asking you the question of, can you beat my output? And that's normally a good posture to take. But there's a lot of things that can beat the output, which makes it a much worse posture to take. This deck being all Engine is cool. It means that you have a lot more functional draws. It means that you're not clunking nearly as much. You are, in fact, almost always doing something reasonably powerful. The problem is that something that you're doing is almost always losing to a Cosmic Ghost Rider, or really any kind of interaction that stops it, and your entire combo is sitting on the board for your opponent to be able to look at and say, oh, do I lose to 12 power in a lane and then also an Iska on the final turn of the game? I better leave. Do I beat that? I better stay and win. It's the Doom 2099 or Ramp of combo decks, where it's just like, everyone you play against should know what you're doing. And if they don't know what you're doing, that's great. Enjoy your free wins. But everyone you play against should know what you're doing. They should have a pretty good idea of what your game plan is the entire game, because this deck has no surprises in it. What is this deck? It is a bunch of end-of-turn cards with end-of-turn triggers to benefit from your combo of Jocasta, Prodigy, and Invisible Woman First Steps. That's it. Sometimes it's a bunch of end-of-turn cards with end-of-turn triggers that benefit from your combo of Fantasticar, Jocasta, and Prodigy. Wow, very different. It's a very straightforward deck that is very, very face up. And while the output is notable and like this is real, it is very easy to play against. We just talked about decks that are easy to play against. They're easy to predict, they're easy to understand what the final turn is going to be, and that gives them sort of a negative cube equity kind of thing going on at higher levels. So one of the things that really good players like to do is play decks that are really hard to play against. And I'm going to show you 4 decks here that are various versions of good player, point allocation, wide range on the final turn decks. We're going to start with Derek's version of Star Star-Lord with Scar. The idea here is to be an extremely interactive final turn deck between Cosmo, Negasonic, Juggernaut, and then just having guys that are big. You will be able to convert that energy from Star-Lord into a combination of points and interaction that your opponents should find incredibly difficult to play around. Now, this is a deck that is relying on that interaction to drag your combo-y opponents down to the level that you need to drag them down to in order to beat them, which means sometimes when you don't line up your interaction with the things you're trying to interact with, you will have to retreat. But largely, this is the kind of deck that rewards a skilled pilot for understanding opposing game plans and being able to design their final turns in order to beat those game plans. The more you know about what your opponent is doing, the more equipped you are to understand what you need to do to beat it. One of the slightly underrated things that has happened in this metagame is there have been quite a few fewer gambits in the mix recently. Gambit horsemen, I should clarify. And that is something that has benefited the old school Batroc decks notably. Now, as Shou-Lao decks have become more combo-y, old school Batroc decks have had to go back to the well, so to speak, because they kind of just get outstatted by either ongoing Shou-Lao or even like Pixie Shou-Lao or like the Activate Shou-Lao. They kind of don't have things for that. So let's go back to the well. Stop being a Shou-Lao deck. Just be a normal Batroc deck scaling up with a bunch of final turn interaction. You might have seen this before. It's a Cosmo Juggernaut deck. Very similar to the previous one, the goal here is to have confusing point output that benefits and scales with your game knowledge, your metagame knowledge, what you know about what your opponent is doing, and how willing you are to line up your counters to that into your opponent's plays. It's a lot of reads, it's a lot of calculation, but it is quite rewarding. Ultimately, I do think it comes up pretty low on the point scale, but if you like playing interactive mid-range, this is definitely an option. Thors and Werewolf have always sort of been a final turn point allocation list. This is, of course, no exception. The Honifer's list is fully all in on as many things you can do on the final turn that are weird and confusing and mostly free thanks to Black Swan, Prowler, and the hammers, of course, themselves. Those things are all going to add points to your board in ways that are not necessarily predictable. A lot of your input is unavailable to your opponent in terms of visibility. A lot of your output is totally under your control, so you can choose where all your things are going to end up going. It's hard to play against this deck, and it's also hard to play this deck. Of all the decks we're talking about, this is the one that is the flying blind the most. The previous two lists definitely have some things going for them in terms of really interactive pieces. This list has a Shadow King and a Prayer, which means that a lot of the time you might not have the ability to win the games that the decks with Juggernaut and Cosmo do, but in exchange you have a lot more points and it moves around a lot more as well. You are much more able to distribute your points in powerful ways, and while I do think that this list is not necessarily going to hold up long term, I think it's a very viable choice right now if you're a fan of the Hammer Bros. Last up, I'm cheating and showing you two Shou-Lao lists that are also built with the same idea of being a little more interactive and a little more confusing in terms of the range. Pixie Shou-Lao is a list that I would think people should start bookmarking now, because when Strife and Fin Fang Foom come out, we're going to cut the Wong and we're going to cut the Ramatut and we're going to put the Strife in and we're going to put the Fin Fang Foom in, and this deck's probably going to be one of the best Strife decks on day one, so remember that. But I do think that what this deck is mostly doing is trying to weaponize surprise in a different but similar way to the previous lists. You want to make your final turns hard to play against. You want your opponents to not really understand what your range is. That's how you get more cubes. This is taking a very predictable deck, Shou-Lao, and adding an element of unpredictability in the form of Pixie, Wong, and Ramatut, or in a few days, Pixie, Strife, and Fin Fang Foom, that will allow you to do a lot of ridiculous stuff. For the record, we might keep the Wong in here. It might be that we lose the Silver Surfer First Steps and the Ramatut for the Strife and the Fin Fang Foom. It kind of depends on how the curve ends up working out, how we feel about that, but you kind of get where I'm going with this. And of course, the interactive alternate Shou-Lao build from Ika is a much more tech-heavy version of Shou-Lao that is trying to play this as a fair points package, just doing some good interactivity here. It's hard to play against this deck. It's hard to play against a deck that can put a Shou-Lao buff on an Iska. You have no idea what the actual F is going on there. It's quite a deck to play against. And the fact that it's also able to be one of the few decks that you really see like meaningfully running a thing like Stardust. It's great against Doom 2099. If people are still playing Hela, it's great against that. It can be good against the Dragon Lord builds of Ramp, which I didn't show, but do exist. Just some real upside in a deck like this. The one thing that I really have as a critique is I really wish I could get a fourth 1-drop in here. I do feel like I miss it sometimes. But other than that, I think this is just a very solid combination of reactive and proactive cards. Now, we've skipped this segment a couple times in the last few weeks, but I do think it's important to remind people that if you are going to be playing Destroy in the big 26, as the kids say, you should probably be playing it as a Shou-Lao list. Like, I realize the null is cool, but it's just so much better to be able to put points in multiple locations on the final turn of the game. I don't think I can go back. I don't know what they'll have to do to Shou-Lao to get me to not want to do this, but I just feel like this is a significant upgrade over the typical Destroy list, and I still see people playing out nulls, and I gotta tell you, every time I see my opponent play out null, sigh of relief, because it means I don't have to deal with the Shou-Lao. Like, okay, congratulations, you got the null out on 5. Good job. Great. I'm proud of you. But it's like, ultimately, the best thing you can do with that null on 5 is make it confusing on 6 by, like, venoming a lane on 6. Like, that's the best thing you do with that null. You know what else does that? Shou-Lao. Shou-Lao does that. Shou-Lao allows you to cover multiple lanes on the final turn of the game. That's a really important thing to do in Marvel Snap. You should do it more. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. If you enjoyed, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. As always, you have been phenomenal. I have been KMBest, and I will see you in the next one.